Crime is so integrated in the history of Las Vegas that this old downtown building, which once housed the post office and courthouse, has been converted to a museum on the topic. The Mob Museum attracts tourists from around the world to explore the Hollywood lure of organized crime figures like Bugsy Siegel, Al Capone, and many of the other faces you see behind me. But we locals depend on law enforcement to curb criminals like that, so we begin our journey here exploring how law enforcement is dealing with a growing population while trying to keep crime rates down.
Right out of high school, just graduated from Western in '72, and within 2 months I was working for the Ralph Lamb, Clark County Sheriff.
Metro Homicide Detective Phil Ramos has policed the streets of Sin City for nearly as long as I've been alive.
Whenever you got out of the patrol car, you had to take your helmet off and put your soft hat on.
Ramos retired from the beat after 33 years, but continues to work as an investigator with the cold case unit. It's no stretch to say he's seen it all in his 3 decades on the force. What was it like in those days policing Las Vegas?
You know, it was so different back then, Darcy. We had, Vegas was still considered a Wild West town. You know, people were riding horses down the street, and cowboys kind of were the norm here. The old nightstick and mace days were in full effect. And
Vegas continued its rise to big city status, yet still had small town heart.
it was a pretty safe town. People still left their doors unlocked and windows open and left their keys in the car, and there were no such thing as home invasions.
The year Ramos started his career, Metro Police didn't even exist. He worked in the Clark County Sheriff's Office. The Las Vegas Police Department was a separate agency, and officials were already debating how to keep up with explosive growth. To avoid duplication of services, a new state law took effect July 1st, 1973, merging the 2 agencies into the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, with 640 officers policing about 260,000 residents.
I don't know that either agency, the Sheriff's Department or the Police Department, were quite prepared for that, because I remember for several months you'd see City of Las Vegas police officer uniforms in Clark County Sheriff cars. So there were the blue uniforms that the city wore and the black and white patrol cars that the Sheriff's Department had, and vice versa.
But it was all eventually unified. Do you recall sort of how the populace reacted to that?
Well, they loved it. Both city and county saw an increase in the visibility of officers that were not there before the merger. So, because we had more officers to cover the same amount of area.
And just in time, as the times were changing.
I think the level of violence has increased dramatically.
Something that's caused many to question over the years whether Las Vegas was better when the mob was in charge.
It depends on who you ask. The old school insiders will tell you, yeah, it was a lot better when the mob ran the casinos, because nobody got away with anything. And there was some truth to that. You didn't go in there and embezzle money from the Stardust when Lefty Rosenthal was running the place.
But the influence of organized crime wouldn't last.
I think the turning point came at the end of the Spilatro area, when the Spilatro brothers were found murdered in Illinois.
That was summer of 1986, and there were other drastic changes that even tough mafia dons couldn't hold back. The Mariel boat lift of 1980, for example, brought the migration of over 100,000 Cubans.
And the vast majority, a huge majority, were good, decent citizens, but there was a very high level of criminal element, hardcore criminals that came from the prisons in Cuba.
Ramos says some of those hardcore criminals settled in Las Vegas, introducing more weapons and more violence.
I don't know how many times I had a cocked .45 put to my head and said, if you're a cop, I'm going to kill you right here.
Luckily, he was good under cover and under pressure, so he lived to tell us the stories of Las Vegas crime lore.
1980s was a defining decade, I think, for everybody in America, but particularly here in Vegas. We saw an influx of street gangs coming from various places in the U.S., but particularly from Southern California.
So, what do the numbers tell us about how much crime Metro is dealing with? According to their annual reports, the total crime index in 2020 was over 55,000. That's actually a fraction of a percent lower than it was 10 years ago in 2010, but violent crimes are 24.6% lower in 2020 compared to 2010. At the same time, the population in Metro's jurisdiction jumped by over 200,000. As far as what areas of town are the most dangerous, Ramos says he's seen a lot of change.
Various neighborhoods, particularly where the gangs moved into. There's high crime rate area there.
Other spots, like the area that used to be called the West Side, had a lot of crime in the past, not so much today.
The biggest change that we've seen in the distribution of crime is the Strip. It's heartbreaking, honestly. It's heartbreaking because the Strip is the iconic image of Las Vegas.
Looking forward, Metro wants to keep a ratio of at least 2 officers per 1,000 residents.
What we found in our research is most jurisdictions that serve 250,000 people or more, they're actually at about 2.2 officers per 1,000. And I do think that's optimal.
Deputy Chief Kelly McMahill says that's the consensus from academia and law enforcement leaders across the country.
As far as being able to police in the way that you need to both suppress crime and react to crime. Here in Las Vegas, you know, that's tricky.
Because Las Vegas is so much more than its residents. Metro is currently operating just below the national standard. Add all the visitors.
We're really only at about 1.5 officers per 1,000. Which
means extra demands for the force.
We're averaging about 900 officers a week working overtime. I think that the national sort of feeling against police has become a real challenge for us to both keep officers here and also go out and recruit for officers. And
Metro is bringing back its cadet program and expanding recruiting efforts to other states, but McMahill says it's not just about numbers.
It's about getting officers that truly reflect the demographics of the people that live and visit this city.
She points out how policing has changed tremendously, now so much more than combating crime. McMahill says police are picking up the mantle of all social services that have gone unfunded for many years.
It's a sad fact that the Clark County Detention Center is the #1 treatment facility for the mentally ill that live here.
Demand for more police services is inevitable with a growing population.
But the challenge is, and always will be, having enough police officers working this valley to keep the people that live here and visit here safe.